Hello and welcome back to my charmed life. Here we are at part 2 of my new series where we tiptoe around sexuality in a tutu and steel-capped boots. It's turning out to be quite a journey, as conversations around sexual orientation are wont to be. The further I delve, the more complex it gets. To be honest, this journey started out for me as a let's suck it and see kind of idea, beginning with celebrating bi pride these past couple of weeks. Did you check out my Instagram? I had my own little mini Mardi Gras. It was fun. And yeah, last podcast I had that highly unusual and very candid chat with my son, which was a great way to break the ice, not just as an interviewer, but also in talking about this stuff. And as fate would have it, that conversation segued into me getting even braver and tackling even trickier themes. Thanks in no small way to the fabulous interview I'm about to play for you. And here's your content warning. Gird your loins, folks. We're going to go there. Cooper, and this is episode 8 of the Eloquent in the Room podcast, a place to get down and dirty and get back up again, hopefully with a fresh new outlook. This series is called Ixnay on the Inery Bay, and this is part 2, putting the bi in non-binary. Yeah, I need to work on my titles. Okay guys, before I replay the interview, here's our backstory. Jessie Ray, aka J Ray, aka other online pseudonyms, currently resides in Melbourne, but when we met, they lived in Sydney. During the earlier part of this decade, Jessie was one of the main driving forces behind a regular multidisciplinary arts event in Sydney called Art Party. At Art Party, you could experience spoken word poetry, singer-songwriters, rock bands, fire twirlers, visual artists creating their art on the spot, even burlesque performances. Before I moved back to Sydney a couple of years ago, for the previous 20 years of my life, I lived in Gosford on the New South Wales Central Coast. There's a fabulous little venue in Gosford called the Rhythm Hut. You can catch amazing gigs there, and you can learn djembe and taiko drumming. You can even crash there if you happen to be backpacking around the world and want to earn your keep doing odd jobs on the property. It's a soulful, eclectic community of hippies and musos and hippie musos, and it's a place you can go as a single woman and stock up on some quality hugs. It was my soft place to fall when my marriage ended in 2013, and it's where I found the courage to start performing with my ukulele at open mics. Fucking amazing karma when you think about it. So this one time, Art Party came to the hut and Jessie performed their spoken word and original songs as part of the bill, and I brazenly plucked up the courage to grab one of the 3 5-minute open mic spots that were up for grabs for locals to open the show. I played one of my satirical little ditties, this one about being a late blooming bisexual. Jessie grabbed me at the end of the night and looked me in the eyes and told me I was fucking hilarious and made me an offer I couldn't refuse to come and play a full set at an upcoming Sydney Art Party. Ooh, the big time. At the ripe age of 53, I had my first paid solo gig. I rehearsed my butt off for the next few weeks getting a set list together because I didn't actually have one yet. You know what? I go into these kinds of details in my stories just to have a whisper in anyone's ear to say to you, it's never too late to do the things you always wanted to do. Just give it a go. When I finally did perform, the audience were putty in my hands, but this was a captive audience, not like you get when you perform at a pub, as I found out later. Jess was sitting front and centre, with a big grin from ear to ear. Holy crap, I can't even begin to express how that felt to be supported and encouraged by someone I admired so highly. It made a huge difference to my sense of self-worth as a performer. We met up a few more times at different events. Jess would say, "Rose, play that lesbian song." And I'd say, "Jess, it's not a lesbian song, it's a bisexual song." At the time, Jess presented as a lesbian. Then a few years ago, they made a lengthy post on Facebook revealing that they were actually bi and had also determined that they were non-binary. Reading about how they had been grappling with this process of self-discovery over their lifetime was revelatory. I was so moved by the sheer generosity of spirit that goes along with making a courageous post like that. There's so much pressure on all human beings to conform. And there can be pressure within the LGBTQIA+ community to conform in other ways. So it had been a while since Jess and I had been in touch. Over the last couple of years, we've both been on our own personal journeys and had self-imposed hiatuses from performing publicly. And so we haven't been in regular touch over the last couple of years. So when I got in contact with them out of the blue, I felt a bit bad that the reason I was contacting them was to do me a favour and come on the podcast and talk about the stuff that they disclosed in their Facebook post. But Jess was keen and I was just thrilled. So the thing is, it wasn't until we had this chat that I fully realised how much I had to learn from them during the course of this conversation. I knew we'd have lots to connect on, but it went to places I wasn't expecting, and I came away from it with a whole new perspective. Okay, let's get a proper introduction underway. These days, Jessie Ray is a harm reduction worker working at Harm Reduction Victoria and the Medically Supervised Injecting Room. They're also on the standing panel for the ARRTS program from the Australian Defence Force and a director for Clean Star Australia. Their father is an ex-army colonel, their mother is a teacher, and they are the youngest of 5 with 4 older brothers. They are obsessed with catharsis and healing through art, music, fire dancing, and poetry. As a painter, Jessie aims to capture the spaces between dreaming and waking, hallucination, vision, and imagination. They always have a small creative demon on their shoulder, and their happy place is at home with their bisexual fiancé, Raw, their cat, Noah, and a blissful art studio. I managed to catch this busy bee between jobs a couple of weeks ago, and this is how that went. Please stick around at the end for a little debrief. With you, when I first met you back in the day a few years ago, at the time you were identifying as a lesbian, so that was how long ago?
That was, when we met, that was probably 6 or 7 years ago, I'd say.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's been a journey. I mean, I started out by dating guys. I fell in love with somebody when I was 17, dated a whole bunch of dudes after that. It wasn't until I was 22 that I came out, and I'd sort of been through the ringer with a few boyfriends. And I was my first love and I, we used to check out chicks together, and he made clear to me that I was attracted to women, that it wasn't just a comparison thing, which my mum believed that it was.
Yeah.
In her mind, I actually think my mum's bi too. In her mind, she goes, "Oh, but aren't all women are a little bit attracted to other women or find other women attractive?" And I'm like, "No, Mum, that's
so you'd had incidental conversations with Mum prior to this that made her sort of try and rationalise it for you?
No, it all came after I came out, and she was trying to understand. But so when I was 22, I came out as gay because I really didn't have an active desire for men at the time. There was no excitement there, whereas with women there was so much excitement. I was eating up queer media, I was eating up queer poetry, and more than that though, it was something about the alternative to the norm. I knew that I wasn't stock standard white bread normal fit in between the lines kind of person in my sexuality. So Yeah, so I came out when I was 22 as completely gay, and that wasn't really, it wasn't intentional, it wasn't strategic at the time. I felt that I was only attracted to women at the time, and I dated women exclusively for about 6 or 7 years after that. And then I had to go back in the closet a little bit. Well, that's what it felt like when I dated 3 more guys after that, and the third was Rory.
Yeah.
And now I'm marrying him. So yeah, it's been really interesting, the whole process, because I've been figuring it out as I go and developing my own education on things as I go. And, you know, throw polyamory into the mix and suddenly you don't have to choose anymore. You don't have to only have one gender of love in your life. You can have multiple because you have multiple lovers. So that was really made clear to me with Rory, my current partner, that he's my forever creature, and we're both bi, and we have the option to see people of the same or other gender or other genders if we wish, and that works beautifully for us. So at the moment, I identify as bisexual.
With that sort of second coming out, or the actual sort of coming out, it's like that whole Cynthia Nixon thing. She came out as gay first and then she came out as bisexual, and I think she sort of second guessed it for a bit and then had to stand her ground, because there is that certain amount of retribution that you can cop if people feel in some way like they've been misled or something within the community. So did you cop any sort of backlash from either people that were close to you or people that didn't really know you that well that decided to be a dick about it?
Yeah. People love to have gotcha moments. People love to go, oh, but you said this, and oh, but you said that, and therefore you don't know shit because you've changed your mind. And I've always supported the fact that you, with your own mind, can change your mind based on new understandings every single day of your life, if that's what suits you. I felt a lot of that pushback from my family, and that I don't put that down to bigotry or anything anymore. I did at the time, but I put it down to lack of education. So my family is the straightest family you can imagine. There's no one in our family or extended family who's on the queer spectrum. 99.9% of my family is right-wing, Catholic, Christian, straight, very standard, normalised. And so
far out.
When I came out as gay, there was a lot of pushback because it was interesting because my whole family, I grew up as a boy. I've got 4 older brothers. I was socialised as a boy. The first time I wore a dress, not that this has much to do with it, but the first time I wore a dress when I was like 11, out of my own choice. My best friend at the time was shocked because she'd never seen me in a dress. I always wore boy uniforms and stuff, right? So my family's response to me coming out as gay was, we knew that. That's pretty obvious. We were waiting for you to tell us. And I was like, okay, cool. And then Mum was curious. So Mum was curious to understand why I thought that I was gay. And so I would explain to her, my attraction to women and this and that. And she was trying to, I think, understand through her own experience of being a woman. And her experience of being a woman is that women appreciate each other's beauty, and cuddle and kiss and link arms and have intimacy in ways that maybe guy friends don't or straight people don't. Or, I will never say this with certainty, but I think Mum needs a greater understanding of what bisexuality means, because I think that in her generation it wasn't considered as such, and it was just like women appreciate each other. And so she was coming to terms with, she was very curious with her questions, which I found great. And there was some pretty horrendous pushback from some of my brothers who thought that it was my understanding of my own sexuality was based on what I was wearing and that I was meeting the wrong kinds of men, which is, it's gross.
Well, it's kind of stock standard, cookie cutter responses that is out there in the sort of mainstream. I hate using the word mainstream because what even is that these days? But everyone has a projected idea or a conditioned idea about what anything means, and I think that's why bisexuality is even harder to explain, because it means something different to people who are bisexual, let alone what it means to other people. I think the spectrum within bisexuality is as vast as the spectrum itself, because it's so fluid. I think all it is an acknowledgement of those blurred lines in an ownership way, and however that tide goes, it really depends on successful relationships or you know, all that sort of stuff that can sort of influence whether or not you got an energy for whatever, you know.
Yeah. It's really funny. Like when I came out, that was a sort of response. And when I went, I call it going back in the closet, because I started dating guys again. There wasn't any big fanfare. There wasn't any big announcement to my family. I just showed up one Christmas with a boyfriend, and I hadn't let them meet any of my girlfriends because I was not very impressed with their behavior. And I didn't want to expose anyone else to that. And so I just rocked up to a Christmas one day with a new boyfriend at the time. And they all were just sort of a bit shocked, and they were all a bit like, oh, I thought you were, what's going on?
A boy's a phase.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a little bit of, like, I will say that the queer community that I was connected to in Newtown, I saw less and less of them. I think there is definitely a perception that if you're bi, you're supporting the patriarchy, or you're supporting heteronormativity or something bullshit like that. But I lost a lot of connections with the queer community. And I don't think that's because I went back in the closet or because I started dating guys again, but rather because I just had less touch points with them. So it's been mostly from my family. But again, it's a lack of education. It's a lack of access to these communities. Like if they knew more people and they talked about it more, they would have more education. So I've just tried to sort of let that be, because there's there's many things that my family need educating on, so I'm picking my battles.
Yeah. Part of the misunderstanding, I think, of what bisexuality is the double standard that people attach to women being naturally predisposed to affection, as you say, and the statistics that bear out that of the bisexual statistics, more are female. But those statistics are also affected by the fact that men don't come out as much as bisexual. Whatever it is we face as women in regard to doubt or insecurity from partners or vilification or anything like that, it's so much worse for men to be out, particularly if they are predominantly into men and they're not as into women. It's sort of like, it frankly scares me. Like, I'm at a stage in my life where I haven't lived my life as a bisexual woman my whole life, even though I've always known that I am. It's just the era that I grew up in. So my opportunities weren't there and all that sort of stuff. But what has led me to want to be really vocal and visible and all that sort of stuff is I know how it was for me when I was a kid, when I got bullied for wanting to kiss girls and all of this sort of stuff. But because it's just there's not a lot of bisexual male role models, we talk about them later on, like Cary Grant back in the day, he was bisexual, or, all these famous actors are now people sort of saying, well, they were bisexual, but could you name a male bisexual apart from Alan Cumming? Like, he's the only one that really jumps out at me as being obvious and out and proud and highly representative.
No, I can't think of a single one. I can't think of many. I mean, I don't consciously look for role models when it comes to this stuff. I can't think of any celebrities that are bi. I can't think of many people in my life that are bi, apart from me and my partner.
Yeah.
There's a few. Then again, I have made the mistake of assuming that women I've dated were lesbians when they were also bi, because of my understanding of, like, I'd met some of their partners in the past, but I hadn't gone back far enough to understand that they also dated men. So it's really, it's challenging. It's less challenging with polyamory because you've got multiple timelines laid across each other. And so if you know a person for a year, you might know them as having 3 different partners. But if you know someone for a year monogamously, you may only know them as having one partner. So it's that contextual knowledge isn't there,
It brings to mind, did you ever watch The L Word, where they all lived in the same town, so they had the roadmap of relationships that, and they all led back to Shane. And I do not blame them one little bit. So that's the extra confusion, because it's not just battling what outside perceptions are, but there's a lot of confusion within in regards to, am I gay enough to say that I'm bisexual? Am I straight enough to say that I'm bisexual, or whatever, wherever it is you reside on the spectrum? Because the stupid BI word is there, so it's conjuring up the binary. So awareness is a big thing, primarily from a mental health point of view. I'm right into wanting to bring that up. But it's really interesting that when you were finding all this out about yourself and developing more in regards to accepting your own sort of sexual fluidity, or whatever you want to call it, around, I would say probably similar to most people, it was about the people. Yep. People come in and out of your life. Most bisexuals, I think, they're really sort of, actually it's about the people that you meet, more so than just going, oh, geez, I really need a penis right now. I really need a vagina right now. There's sort of, it's not a disembodied craving. It's just people dictate how you feel.
And that's it. Like, we don't seek penises or vaginas necessarily in sex. We seek intimacy and pleasure, and you can get that from any combination of genitals, And I think what's been really interesting in the last, say, 10 years, so I studied gender studies at uni as one of my minors, and what I've found really interesting in the last decade is we're understanding bisexuality in a deeper context, in terms of it meaning more than two genders rather than just two genders. But we're also seeing that the concept of gender is constructed, and there are not just two. So like I personally have only dated men and women, to my knowledge. They haven't necessarily, they haven't told me that they've identified as trans. I haven't known if I'm attracted to a trans person, in terms of, I don't know if a person's trans without seeing their genitalia with their permission. It's nothing, So I can't say for sure that I'm not attracted to trans folks, or that I am, but it is interesting because the more you drill deep into what gender is, the more that impacts how you identify your sexuality. And I think there's a lot of entropy that is coming into, and a lot of destruction that is coming into our preconceived notions of these things, these really simplified notions of sex, gender, sexuality. And I say, blow the whole damn thing up.
Yeah. It feels like a house of cards that has literally just collapsed overnight, because everybody's got to learn new language, and it's sad because people do attach a lot of their mental health to these identifications, their self-identification, and when it takes other people a while to catch up, it can hurt feelings, and it's not meant to be. Like people who forget to use the correct pronouns unless they're belligerently refusing to. A lot of people just forget to use the correct pronouns. But
I've got to say as well, if I may, that in part of this discussion, that's something that's been interesting to me is a lot of my friends, even though they don't know, or they might not have known how I identify, they can see in me masculine and feminine traits. They can see predominantly masculine traits. And so they always assumed that or a lot of them assumed that I was queer, or that I was non-binary, or whatever, or may have understood that before I did. But there's also a greater understanding of masculine and feminine traits in a person. And, just because a woman might appear with more masculine traits doesn't mean she's a lesbian, for God's sakes. Like, there's so many different combinations of these elements inside of us, and that it's a total mixed bag.
So me catching up with even the word cis, it's like, I don't know, 8 years ago or something, I saw it written and I didn't know what it was. I had to Google it. Oh, okay. And then my first impulse was, why do I have to have something attached to my identification? I took that defensive thing until it really sunk into me what transgender was, and my own assimilation of my own various feelings of gender fluidity from time to time, just by virtue of how I feel on any given day sometimes, or the roles I've played on stage, and the body language that I use. And I just think some of this stuff is just in there. It's not like you have to pretend. You're just sort of drawing on a part of your character that's another human facet.
Yeah, for sure. And the way I see it is, if we're going to go into classification of people's being, you can't only classify the other. Like, that is othering in its very concept. So you have to classify what both sides of it, or cis meaning identifying with the gender you were born as, and trans meaning crossing over, or identifying with the other or another. And I kind of think about it in the same terms as I think about neurodivergence and neurotypical brains. There's different classifications and ways of understanding how different things work. And I think once you see it in those terms, you can remove a lot of the emotion from it and the defensiveness, especially if you're not used to this terminology. And it's not about othering people. It's never been about that. It's about the classification. And that's what humans do. We compartmentalize each other to try to understand how to relate and how to orient ourselves in the world. And I think it's pretty normal. But I do love that people are learning about queer theory more and more because of trans folk and because of gender discussion and because of their own desire not to be stuck with what they were given, the understanding that they have a choice in the matter, that they can identify for themselves and really dig deep into what they feel and what they want rather than a piece of paper given to them at birth. I think that's extremely empowering.
Yeah, just as the human race develops, human beings develop. So, every so often they've just got to hand us a new memo. Roundabouts are happening at the next intersection instead of lights. So let's learn what that is.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing. Like, we're now appreciating that, pushing people into these gender constructs all these years is causing massive suicide, that it's not a phase, that it's not a mental illness, that it's something beyond explanation. You just have to believe when people tell you who they are.
Exactly. And you don't. The other thing is, it kind of ties into like trauma response in my mind as well, because people are very quick to minimize another's trauma. Oh, it can't possibly be that bad, or, you can't have been that oppressed or whatever. Yeah. But the thing is, we don't get to decide the impact of something for somebody else. We live our experience, they live theirs. So I find it really strange when people push back against gender and sexuality stuff, because what the fuck would you know? You're not the one living in that body with those desires. So it's irrelevant what your thoughts on it are, really, unless you're the person who is talking about it of themselves,
Yeah, just general objection to it, like same-sex marriage. Like the whole time same-sex marriage was on the table, I was very vocal about that as well, and kept correcting people when they wanted to call it gay marriage and all that sort of stuff. But very much people wanted to have a part of the conversation that didn't have anything to do with them and didn't affect them. And that's, I guess, that's where we fall back into the what I was talking about before with men who identify as bisexual or don't come out. Like, apparently, statistically speaking, there are more bisexual people on the rainbow than there are any of the other colours combined, sort of thing. There's that big overlap there. But women are more likely to come out than men.
Far be it for me to discuss what a guy's experience is, but I do want to drop in as well that when was it, in the 70s, I guess? 70s, maybe even early 80s, when homosexuality was still illegal in Australia, or criminalised. Women, lesbians and women who love women could quite easily get away with it. And they weren't arrested. They might have been sexualised, they might have been leered at, they might have been rejected from their families, but they weren't thrown in prison for it. Whereas young gay men were, all gay men were at the time, right? And I think that plays a lot into the current, that was only 40, 50 years ago. That plays a lot into the current conception, like understanding of
historically acceptable. a long time ago, I don't think it was even imagined that it happened, so it wasn't even against the law.
And if it wasn't seen as a threat, because women weren't perceived to pass on bloodborne virus to one another, because that was seen as a up the bum, penis to penis sort of HIV sort of thing. And so it's this like deep stigma and discrimination against and criminalisation of people, which women who love women have felt that, but I don't think we've felt it to the same extent as men have. And I think that has created a really, really tight community among men who love men. And it's also, it's created maybe perhaps a misunderstanding for women who love women who might not know that, who might not think about that context and how that affects today's internalized homophobia among men, and also how men are socialized in a patriarchy. Like, they're not encouraged to talk about emotions. They're not encouraged to be affectionate. They're not encouraged to use their friends as social supports, only to drink beer, kick footies, you know, beat their chest and get on with it. And that's so fucking damaging. That's damaging across the board. Imagine if men were able to explore curiously what is good for them in a safe way with other guys, that'd be beautiful. There'd be so much healing out of that and so much joy, but that's not necessarily a thing that I think men feel that they can do.
Well, my glimmer of hope is the conversation that I had with Jack, because he said guys his own age have no qualms about admitting or coming out as bisexual for the most part, and understanding that, you know, there's just less, there's definitely no shame around it. Let's put it that way. And I know. Exactly. I couldn't be more excited and happy about it. And it feels it's just stigma on top of stigma on top of stigma with male bisexuals, or just bisexuality or homosexuality or anything to do with anything, especially when it comes to abuse. We've got more young men are sexually abused within the church than young women are, or boys and girls. And again, that's more easily swept under the carpet for the exact same reasons that we're sort of talking about. So
I have my own theories about that sort of stuff. I come from the Catholic Church, and I think that there's something completely wrong and horrendous about the Catholic Church, but that's an entirely another topic for another day.
Having said that, it's not like it never won't come up, because abuse and trauma and all these things are things that I do want to get to in the long run. And it's like everybody has conversations about sex positivity. Everyone has conversations about this, but this and that. But my standpoint is always with the whole eloquent in the room thing, is the idea that let's talk about things that we're not acknowledging, not necessarily keep beating the same dead horse all the time. Like, you know, or just say this is right, this is wrong, and people who don't think that are stupid, rather than let's dig a bit deeper and try and work out why they think that. So I think this is an ideal conversation to have with you, because that's your thought processes behind it. It's like, what, you know I think this way. Why? You actually have that extra layer of curiosity that isn't sort of grounded in an ego problem of, you know, needing to be right, or, you know, not make a mistake or whatever.
I'm pretty human though, so I've got my ego issues as well.
So obviously I don't want you to speak for Rory, but is there anything that you wanted to add in regards to how you guys sort of feel there's symmetry? Like Jack's got a new girlfriend, and she's also bi. And
cool.
He just sees this as an extra bonus to their relationship, in that they at least have symmetrical sort of experiences of viewpoints about these things. They don't have to explain themselves to each other.
Yeah, it was really, so we do understand each other in that way, and that's really nice to not have to explain ourselves. But also, so there's a very unique conversation he and I had, I think close to the beginning of when we started dating, and we started out as poly, and my reasoning for wanting to be polyamorous with him was that I love women, and I love being with women, and I don't want to lock myself into a relationship with a guy, because I know that I will miss women and I will miss opportunities to connect with them if I'm monogamous. And so it was really interesting, because he was the first person I've met, the first guy that I've met whose feminine and masculine sides are completely 100% balanced. He's worked on his shit enough to have awareness and consideration and all, like, nurture and all the juicy stuff that is usually considered a female trait, right? And he's this beautifully balanced person. And I was madly, and still am madly in love with him. He satisfied 99.9% of all of my desires and needs, except one. And that's okay. If we're poly and if we're understanding and with respect starting our relationship, it's really good to have that understanding of each other, and not I guess keep each other beholden to something that we can't possibly be. So I think it's a bullshit proposition that in the first place that a partner should satisfy all your needs. I mean, I say that he does, knowing that I take care of my own needs. But yeah, the way that I view polyamory, the way that I view bisexuality, the way that I like these things are that there are many different things that you can connect on and gain from a lot of different connections, from, you know, from casual sexual connections to a deep friendship to whatever. And so to minimize your viewpoint, or to minimize my viewpoint and focus only on one person, it's kind of reductive. It's really basic for me, because I already know the other side. I know how deeply satisfying it is to make a woman come. I know that it feels like making myself come. I know that in those moments I'm way more satisfied with her orgasm than my own, which is not an experience I have necessarily when I'm sleeping with a guy. So there is my internal, I guess, my internal measure of masculine traits and feminine traits and spirit, I suppose, flips sometimes when I'm with a woman, and I become more masculine if they are more feminine, or I become more feminine if they are more masculine. And for me, there's a little bit more movement in being able to play a role or step into another part of yourself with somebody of the same sex. So it's been this really interesting journey, but it's always been, for he and I, it's always been pure acceptance, understanding. The only rules we've placed around it for each other are don't date each other's mates, because that's just a shit move.
Yeah.
Be safe. And if anybody, guy or girl, ever assaulted or abused or treated either one of us badly, we're going to go after him.
Yeah, you know? Absolutely.
Those are the rules that we follow, and it has sweet fuck all to do with what's in someone's pants.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is all coming hot on the heels of the first 4 episodes I did of the podcast, which were about female orgasm, like 4 episodes of debunking myths, demystifying, and also taking away all the science that has been like pretty let us down pretty much, as well as education let us down and all that sort of stuff, and taking away even the anatomy. I even sort of said, let's just put the clitoris aside for a bit and just focus on what is an orgasm, why do we have them, what are the hormones, what's all this sort of stuff, and what is the main trigger. And the main trigger that is something that is universal to all of us is that moment of letting go and allowing it, right? So when you were just talking about the difference between your experience with male and female, I wanted to ask the question. You don't have to answer it, but I wanted to ask the question, do you feel less inhibited in either instance? Is there a part of you when you're assuming the role of, if it's the person who is giving pleasure or receiving pleasure or whatever, that there's a lack of, something that connects you or grounds you more to that experience? What felt like you were more grounded in the other person's orgasm, and it gave you that energy.
It's not that simple, because it's not that simple. And this may be going too far into it, and I apologize if anyone doesn't want to know so much information about me. But there's another element to it, which is that I'm into kink and BDSM, and that really does play with dominant and submissive energies, or what are traditionally understood as more masculine and feminine energies, right? Not to say that that carries across. So when it comes down to, it's not as simple as I prefer sex with a woman or sex with a guy. With women, I feel more like I want to provide. I want to fucking worship at the altar. I want to make that person feel absolutely ridiculously loved and capable and comfortable to have the most world-rocking orgasm they've had, right? And I know that Rory feels that same way with me. And that was like, I definitely prefer giving head to women than I do to men, because it's not as invasive. It's not as uncomfortable. That said, the experience of giving pleasure to someone and worshipping at anyone's altar, whether they're male or female, is an awesome feeling. You feel very empowered, and you feel like giving someone the best gift ever. So I can't easily answer that question in those terms. But there's definitely a sense of belonging for me that exists within a queer framework that doesn't necessarily exist where I appear to be hetero, which I appear to be at the moment. You know? Like, we're both bi, but like to anyone seeing us from the outside, well, we're just a straight couple, you know? And so I can feel in myself, I rail against that a little bit and I reject that because I know that it's productive, and I also know of all the amazing benefits and the growth that I've experienced in entering the queer community and in dating women and in loving women and everything in between. So like, yeah, there's a sense of belonging within the queer community and a sense of loss that I don't have when I don't hook up with women, but I don't date women. Like that at the moment, I'm not dating any chicks. So I definitely feel disconnected from that sense of myself. And it's hard. I've been thinking about this for years, and I think it's because within the queer community, you meet so many different variations of what it is to be a woman, and none of them are defined by a man. All of them are self-defined and defined by sisters. And so within the queer community, right, I guess, okay, I need to go back a little bit further for context. I was brought up as a dude, 4 older brothers, tomboy mum. I didn't have very many feminine role models, right? So, and a lot of the understanding in my family was that, you know, little throwaway phrases like, oh, throw like a girl, or stop being a sissy, or like whatever, boys don't cry, all of that stuff. So it was automatically assumed that to be female was to be lesser. And it was automatically assumed as well that women wear pinks and frills and heels and makeup and long hair and da-da-da-da-da. That's how you be a woman. And they, you know, to the point where if I sat down too heavily on a chair, my gran would tell me to be more dainty, stuff like that, which I just thought was absolute fucking bullshit. Excuse my language, but I really, really strongly feel that those sorts of behaviours should not be gendered. And so when I entered the queer community and I met all these wonderful women, it was jarring for me because suddenly I was seeing all the many different ways of being a woman. And I was a tomboy and I hated being a woman up until I met other queer women, and I was like, oh shit, you're a mechanic and you're a painter and you're a belly dancer and you're a yoga teacher and you're a bloody physiologist or you're a physicist. Like, you can do, you're gorgeous and you're butch and you're feminine and you're sporty. Like, there's so many different ways to be female that I'd had no access to before because the understanding of being female was always dictated to me by men, not by women. Mm-hmm. And I hated that. So in finding this community, I found a way to redefine what woman was to myself. I learned about gender theory, as I said, at uni. And I, to be honest, I've hated being a girl for most of my life. I hated having boobs. I developed overnight. And I saw the restrictions on a person that came with femininity and came with womanhood. It was all about restrictions and a different set of rules. Yeah. And I've always said, fuck that. And so it's come through, you sort of follow the pathway through my 20s within the queer community. I'm like, hang on a second, that's all rubbish. That's all constructed by men for their own benefit. And actually, I prefer the women who make up their own definitions. My understanding of butch women isn't necessarily that they're trying to be more like men. That's not the understanding at all. They've taken men out of the equation. They just want to be strong in their body and dress how they want to dress. It's nothing to do with men. So like these understandings are what I really developed. And it gave me for the first time in my life a sense of pride of being a woman because I saw amazing women and I met amazing women. And as I continued on, I really challenged myself. I was wondering if I was trans. I was wondering if I was non-binary. I was wondering all this stuff. And I challenged myself. I was like, all right, before you get there, before you figure out the next step, like figure out a different definition for women, one that sits well with you, one that isn't reductive and dismissive and less than. And so when I did that, I was able to go, okay, cool, here are the women I know. Then I was able to say absolutely for sure there are clear differences between the women I know who identify as women and who love their predominant femininity, and then there's me. And I feel like a creature. I don't feel like a woman. I feel like a mud rat. I feel like I'm more comfortable in shorts and sneakers than I ever will be in heels and makeup.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not who I am, and it's never been because it's not comfortable and it doesn't feel good. So all of these things, not to say that clothes type determines your gender, but it really did help me to sort of go through the stages of understanding how I wanted to identify by meeting stronger role models within that community. And, as time goes on, I've realized that I am non-binary because I understand gender to be a fucking construct, and I refuse to be constructed by the people who made the rules, which are predominantly dudes. So
How cool is it? Like, it's like with transgender being obviously more spoken about because people were transitioning from one gender to the other, and then non-binary was there. They were waving their hands around, much like bisexual people, sort of going, okay, educating us and educating themselves about the choices they wanted to make. I think there's probably been the same questioning that goes on there. It's like, am I transgender male, or am I transgender female, or am I actually non-binary? And I'm so, it just excites the living fuck out of me for many reasons, because I've always been attracted to androgynous women, but androgynous people, but probably more attracted to androgynous cis women, if that makes sense.
I read something interesting the other day. So my definition for myself of why I identify as non-binary is because I refuse to be defined by a very restrictive binary model, right? And because I recognize that there's masculine and feminine traits in me, whatever. I'm not the typical female. I've never been. But I read this thing the other day, which was that non-binary is trans, because trans literally means not the gender that you were assigned at birth.
Yeah.
So non-binary is a subcategory, I guess, of trans.
Trans is the umbrella. Trans is the umbrella, just like bisexual is the umbrella. So, and these things are being studied in scholarly articles, but they're not getting the message out there. Probably is not as all pervasive as it possibly should be, because within the communities you've got people being a little bit factional about it, and I don't know, there's politics there. People want to jump on the bandwagon of what they want you to be rather than who you really are sometimes. So it's back to that classification thing. Like we feel safe and feel a sense of belonging when we can identify that those who are around us share the same values, right? And so I can totally understand why, the lesbian community might reject bi women or bi men, from the gay community, that sort of thing. But I can understand why there's a level of suspicion there that bi women are just sort of weekend warriors that are interested in experimenting but not interested in the long haul and not committed to, long-term gender theory discussions and all that. But at the same time, I think that's a product of fear, and a product of having been rejected from so many people for so long and having to fight for a sense of safety and a sense of belonging in the world. So I can't hold that against anybody because I've also done it myself. Yeah. And I'm pretty excited when I meet other non-binary folk because I have the same thing. And I've had people really question, even pretty woke people not question, but curiously ask me why I identify this way now, since I've moved to Melbourne especially. Makes it a hell of a lot easier to move away from my entire community and re-identify myself. But even, I found that really strange because their definitions were different. And so by their definition, I wasn't making sense. But that's okay. Yeah. This is all a very amorphous mix of constant learning, isn't it? It is.
We can never be absolutely certain.
On one hand, people idealise the situation and sort of say, oh, I don't like labels or I don't like to use a label, but right or wrong, labels do help some people.
Some people,
because
sure.
It gives them that community and it gives them that sense of, needing to give who they are a name or how they feel a name, just to further reinforce in themselves something that they know about each other, and they can actually direct someone to a text in a book. Look, I identify as this person and this is my label, and actually it helps other people deal with it rather than the person who assigns themselves the label, if that makes sense.
Totally.
One of these with the Black Lives Matter campaign and protests and everything that's been happening over the last few months, which has been obviously really, really stressful and triggering for a lot of people. I've come across a wonderful leader by the name of Janaya Khan, and they are non-binary, biologically female, and one of the best speakers and most gifted leaders, and just so most charismatic and most singularly beautiful people I've ever seen in my life, you know. And that's the thing, is with this recategorization, it gives me a name for what I feel when I'm attracted to people who are to me, I guess it is non-binary. It's more than androgyny. It's more than just so I know that I'm not like someone walks in the room and they're particularly handsome or good looking or pretty or whatever. I don't sort of get all thingy. But I know if Janaya walked in the room, I wouldn't know what to do with my face. I would faint. I would be so enamored of just how perfect a human being they are to me, you know. So
I feel that way about the lead singer from the internet, especially in a song called Don't Ya. You should look this up afterwards. But
okay.
I don't know like how that person identifies at all. All I know is that they're probably the most gorgeous and talented singer I've seen in my life. And so attractive.
So when some people go nuts over Brad Pitt or whoever who's conventionally good looking, and I'm just, I don't understand it until I do, and it's always about someone who's really interesting. But Janaya says they are non-binary because they are too cute for just two genders. So there's a lot of beautiful self-confidence and stuff that goes with their message and everything. And I highly recommend you follow on Instagram or whatever.
Yeah, well, that's just reminded me actually, like a lot of my rejection of the woman label over the years has had so much to do with other people's expectations on me, but not just my behavior, but my future me, like my future actions. And if I'm going to use my womb, if I'm going to bear children, if I'm going to do this or that, like, and it's so basic and it's so invasive and it's so personal that there's a part of me that wants to throw all of that entirely away. And if I normally preferably have a shaved head. I'm growing it out now for my mum. This was the payoff. My mum wanted me to grow it out and have girly hair for the wedding. And, you know, I'm her only daughter. So I did promise that I would do that. But the day after the wedding, I'm going to shave it off again. And the reason I love it is because when I'm out in the world, I don't have to think about hair and do hair and pay for hair and have the hair take up my life. But people don't know whether I'm male or female. They don't know whether I'm queer or straight. They don't make assumptions about me, and they don't make assumptions about my uterus. And that is crucial because it's none of your fucking business, you know? Yeah. And I love that. I think that for me is privacy.
Yeah.
It's so weird to me that people who, you know, strangers on the street, random, you know, distant relatives will pry into your life in this way because that's their understanding of how life goes, or that's the normal path that you should follow. And I don't ever want to follow that path. That's not for me.
Yeah, that's the way things were always done. So that's the way things are done. It's like the gender reveal parties. I think people know that they know that it's 2020. They know that it's wrong, but they want to do this thing that people are doing. Everyone's sort of treating it like it's the same as a wedding or some kind of it. It is. It's an odd thing.
It's even more ridiculous now that you consider how many bloody bushfires have started in the States from gender reveal explosives. Like, can you get more irresponsible?
No. Or even,
what I've loved seeing, actually, I've had a bunch of friends recently who have fallen pregnant or had kids, and because they've had kids in this day and age, one friend in particular has given their kid a name that can be androgynous and can be easily changed if their kid decides that they're a different gender. And they put that much thought into it when they were naming their kid, that much agency. And I've seen it multiple times. I've asked, people ask at work, another woman's pregnant at work, and someone asks them, what are you having? And she said, I'm having a boy, until, at least I think I am, until he tells me otherwise. That's, until he knows enough about himself. And I just thought that was just so beautiful that people are cottoning onto it enough to implement those teachings into the next generation. It's becoming normalized, and to be able to identify yourself rather than have another do it.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
It needs to be said as well, though, that what I wish that maybe I don't wish I'd done anything differently, but I think is really important is to have folks understand that there can be a period of exploration as well. Like how some may know without a shadow of a doubt that they're gay or lesbian or queer or biased from when they're young, but others may need to experiment, play the field a bit, and really get to know what it's like to be in same-sex relationships or other gendered relationships, so that they can identify themselves, because you only know what you know, right? And sometimes, even if attraction is there, you may not want to pursue relationships with folks. Like there's a whole range of things that go into it, but I think we need to, I've always thought the Q in LGBTQ stood for queer, but I have understood it since as to potentially stand for questioning. And I think that's a really important part of our sexuality, is the ability to continue questioning it.
Yeah, isn't it interesting?
And not necessarily to identify straight away.
Yeah, because that's another big umbrella. Like technically, we could get away with just having a Q instead of all the letters. But everyone's sort of wanting to have their own sense of their own, what their particular assignation is. But I like queer. Yeah. I think I like that it's less, the least binary of all, it seems.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
More leeway there. It's not just it's gender, it's orientation, it's this, it's that, the other thing. It's even to do with whether or not you're kinky or whatever. So yeah.
True.
Yes. So I've got to put my ego back, because I do. I want to sort of say, well, your experiences with your orgasm may change as you get older, and you may find that you tune in just as much to any gender that you happen to be with, in the same way that you do with women, because whatever neurodivergencies happen at the time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think this is what's really interesting, is that while I know that I have a lot of internalized stigma about a whole bunch of topics that I'm always working to unpick and understand, and I think everyone does, whether or not they recognize it in themselves, right? And the more I understand the lived experience of trans folk, the less stigma I find in myself and in those around me who are also learning. And it really does not have anything to fucking do with bits. Like, from an outside perspective, if you're falling in love with a trans person, you want to make them feel good all over their body, not just on their bits, like on their fingertips as well as their eyebrows. Like it's a whole body sensation. It's not just located to one area. So yeah, I agree. I'm sure it will continue to morph and change. I hope it does.
Well, that's how you doing. That seems like a good spot to wrap it up, because I don't want to take up too much of your time. But
thank you.
Yeah, but I really, really, really appreciate you giving me your time and being really candid. It doesn't matter how comfortable you think that you can be. I think there's still that room for remaining humble and curious about everybody else's experience, and just sort of saying, oh, you're a woman? I know what that feels like. Oh, you're... Yeah.
We don't know shit. We only know what we experience, right? Even if someone tells us stuff, we can only understand it in terms of our experience. There's so much that we can't possibly know.
Well, every conversation that I have, or anytime I read anything or look at anything, I always discover something new. And you just gave me a new perspective on butch women You put me in a headspace you put me in a headspace where I didn't, because we've been othered, women have been othered for so long that the idea to put womanhood on a spectrum that is go from extreme female to the other, and at the other end has to be male.
Yeah, it's bullshit.
Rather than
it's
being another expression of being female as just being, a strong, solidly built, competitive or whatever it is that defines that person as butch to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I've been called butch by people in the past as a slur. When I was identifying as a lesbian, I was feeling that I was a soft butch, soft butch or a hard femme. And so I can't, and I dated a couple of butch folks as well, butch women as well, so I can't speak for them. But the reading that I did on it, especially at uni, was, and I don't know if many people think about it in these terms even. I think about it in an academic sense because I studied it, but I really, 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 really identified with the fact that you can't assume, like there is an assumption, especially from straight white dudes in society, that butch women and butch lesbians are trying to replace the man in a relationship. They're trying to, fill the gap in, essentially. And that's just so fucking wrong, and it's so far from the truth. It's an entirely new definition of self that has nothing to do with men, and that I think is really difficult for men to grasp, but to not be centered for the first time.
And it's not even just men.
You have to talk to a butch person.
Yeah, it's not even just men when you think about it. It's just the traditional way of seeing what male and female are, and we look at men who are soft in the same way. So it's sort of,
we do.
Yeah,
but I mean, I'm talking etymologically speaking as well. I'm talking about even the word female has male in it and woman has men in it. Like it's we have always been the rib of Adam, like the afterthought, and I fight against that because
totally.
Actually, Adam didn't come first. Someone had to birth Adam, so...
Yeah. Oh, yeah, well,
I reckon
forget the Bible entirely.
Yeah. Well,
women always should come first.
Fucking oath. I think that's a great point to finish it.
All right, my love. It was really, really lovely to see you, and hopefully catch up soon, and perhaps we'll deep dive into a different topic on a different occasion if you're feeling up to it.
Yeah, sounds like fun.
Awesome. Please give Rory my love.
I will. Thank you so much for this. I look forward to when it comes out.
All right, sweetheart. So there you go. How was that? I really enjoyed it. I hope you guys did too. Apologies for the sound quality. I was so engrossed in the conversation that I didn't notice at the time that there was a few noises and little bits of interference with the signal and stuff. Jess was talking on a laptop. But yeah, we were both so engrossed in the conversation that I wasn't really paying a lot of attention to that. So I hope you could make it out pretty clearly for the most part. And yeah, I just think as a conversation, we did sort of circle back to the same topic a couple of times only to branch out. I liken it with bisexuality being the pebble of a conversation, and every time we threw a pebble into the stream to talk about it, it would radiate out to different topics, and we'd circle back to it again, and then it would radiate out again to different topics. So it was an interesting conversation, and I've been floating on air ever since, I've got to say. And it also segues really well into the fact that the very next interviews that I had, which was over the weekend, they were back-to-back interviews that I had with a 21-year-old trans man and a, let's say, mature age trans woman. And the contrast in those conversations meant that it was a roller coaster of stuff, emotions and concepts. And I'm going to try and thread those two conversations together. We'll see how we go. They'll either come out as two separate podcasts, or they will be one podcast broken into two halves. I have to go back and have another listen to them. But I just feel really fucking lucky to have these wonderful people come into my life, and therefore, because they are friends in my circle, I'm able to bring them into this podcast situation and learn that much more about them and learn that much more about human nature and the bonding exercise of having the conversations. It's just been awesome. So I hope you're enjoying them. Let me know. Get in touch. As I say, you're always welcome to get in touch with me. Drop me an email or a DM on any of the social media platforms. Send me a message at theeloquentintheroom@gmail.com. Jump onto my website. If you want to be anonymous, go to the links page, and there's survey links for you to pop on, and you can send me anonymous questions or anonymous feedback that way. It's really open. Thanks again to people who have been in touch to tell me how much they were moved by the conversation that I had with my son in the previous podcast. That really hits me deep down inside where I live. So thank you very much, because it was a bit risky and weird to contemplate it, but it felt really normal and cool afterwards. Don't you hate the constraints of society and how they hold you back from doing things that end up being really worthwhile? Anyway, all this gender and sexuality stuff is helping me wend my way towards talking about love, relationships, anxiety, trauma, and all that other fun stuff. I'm just following it as I go and letting it grow organically. Eventually, I'll get around to talking more about sex. I only lightly touched on masturbation previously during the orgasm podcasts. Yes, I said that way. And I'm pretty sure I should probably come back to that eventually. So if you've been hanging for that, get in touch. Give me a nudge and tell me what you want me to talk about. The other thing is I've popped a playlist onto Spotify. People have been saying to me how much they enjoyed the musical morph things that I threw into 2020 An Orgasmic Oddity. And Lordy knows that I made a lot of geeky references to movies and everything throughout that series and intermittently ever since. So I've thrown a playlist together that have obvious music that you may have already heard in the podcasts and possibly wondered who the artist was, and also incidental references attached to the geeky film references that I made, or anything I might have sung subliminally in the background, or maybe even during my bisexuality awareness campaign on Instagram. So yeah, if you like my taste in music, you might want to jump on a Spotify, look for either Rose Cooper and or the Eloquent in the Room playlist, and you'll find it that way. Okay, cats and kittens, that wraps it up for another podcast. Don't forget to check the show notes for links to things that were mentioned in this podcast. I'm really looking forward to catching up with you guys next time. And until then, don't forget, if anybody tries to tell you who you are and how to live, tell them to fuck off. Or it might not be in your nature to tell them to fuck off. You might be nicer than me. You might want to say, I appreciate what you're trying to say, but I don't want to live that way. No, fuck it. Just tell them to fuck off.